Field by field, Maizex is bringing Canadian seed to farmers across Canada. Maizex is your source for high-performance soybeans and grain, silage, and grazing corn hybrids. Visit maizex.com to find your local Maizex representative.
Well, an issue that has a lot of people concerned, farmers, I think Canadians just in general, is what potentially could happen here on August 22nd, or maybe days following, in terms of a rail strike of over 9,000 rail workers across CN and CPKC. Joining us right now to discuss some of the agricultural implications and hopefully some hope, so to speak. It is Kyle Larkin. He is the Executive Director with the Grain Growers of Canada, based out of Ottawa. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
Okay, man. I guess we had the end of the last week the CIRB decision. Now they were looking at overall, I guess, safety concerns relative to propane and basic supplies, the railways, or essential services or supplies, I guess. That ruling was my take when I read it, a little bit lighter than I thought. I thought they were going to come out a little bit stronger in terms of some of these things being a little bit more essential.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed in the ruling. I mean, they were looking at essential products that included propane, it included agricultural products, it included a whole suite of things. I was fairly disappointed. I mean, if they're looking at the mandate of safety of Canadians, which I read into the well-being of Canadians, I think the transportation of things like propane is important for northern communities that rely on it, that's for sure. But at the same time, I think that the transportation of grain is fairly important as well. In my personal opinion, economic security is the security and safety of Canadians. So economic security and food security, especially for domestic usage and international usage, in my personal opinion, is important. But the CIRB obviously didn't see it that way. I think a small win, if you want to take a small win out of it, is that we had a cool down period implemented. We could have seen a strike starting today. If we didn't have that cool down period. So at least we have until August 22nd to see a possible work stoppage. I think the answers from some of the railways too is a little disappointing as well. We already saw from CPKC, for example, that they're going to have a lockout start August 22nd. So no matter, even if the union was going to delay their strike, let's say past August 22nd, well, the workers are going to be locked down anyway. So we know for sure we're going to see a work stoppage at least on one of the railways on August 22nd. So that's a worry. And really the only thing we can do is call on all parties to get back to the table and get a deal done before that date comes along.
There was hope that the two parties would come to some sort of a resolution between when the minister came up with this idea and the end of last week. But it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of movement or a lot of at least positive rumors coming out of those talks.
To me, it seems that that all the parties are stuck in their own positions. CP wants something, CN wants something, and the Teamsters union wants something else. The sticking points I've heard for the union is really around safety and around the railways. They're looking for more service in general. Surprisingly, it doesn't really seem as if the discussion of money, the discussion of salaries and dollars is really at the forefront of these negotiations. It's really around service and safety, and I think some of those conversations are opposing each other.
Well, if this strike happens August 22nd, we're into a new crop shipping season. You know, if from a Western Canadian perspective, and there's lots of components and moving parts of this, but let's just think about the Western Canadian crop for a second.
Yeah.
What's the impact if this strike happens from a grain movement perspective?
Massive impact. I think most grain farmers know the impact of when a railway goes on strike. What they don't know and what we don't know is when both railways go on strike. This would be the first time ever in Canadian history where we have both CN and CP on strike. So what we've been able to see previously, let's say CP goes on strike, CN's still operating, well, at least farmers have an option. This would give them zero options. All our class one railways would be on strike. 0% of grain would be moving. And so the immediate impacts would be grain elevator storage would get full. Storage on farms is going to get full. So grain farmers are going to have to figure out where to put their grain. They're going to have to figure that out pretty quickly. The other impact too is obviously grain farmers aren't going to be able to sell their grain. They're not going to be able to make money. So while, you know, they've been growing crops and the harvest just started, I think most farmers are excited to make some money off of their crops that they're harvesting right now. They're not going to be able to start August 22nd if we see a work stoppage on both railways.
Now, from getting into the weeds here a little bit, will there be trains running, or is this like a total shutdown?
From what I've heard, it's a total shutdown. So it's not just grain, right? It's everything and almost anything that Canadians rely on. I think most Canadians don't know how much is transported by rail, right? It's your TVs and your couches and your iPhones, but it's also grain, propane, gas, fertilizer. There's almost all of the products that we rely on in Canada are transported by rail one way or another. Grain, for example, 94% of grain is transported by rail. So, without both railways operating, we're going to be at almost a full economic shutdown.
Is there like auto sector, hugely impacted here. I just think of the potash that can't get to the US is just that's an example.
Yeah.
Ethanol into Canada, we're the largest importer of US ethanol. Those are ones that come to mind right away, and there's many examples. Can the government actually let this happen? It just seems like this is a devastating situation for not only the economy but Canadians as individuals. Everyone's going to feel this in some fashion. Can the government stop it?
It's a great question. So I spoke to the minister on Friday, and we talked about all the different tools that he has in his toolbox. One of the tools he has, and that previous ministers have had, previous governments have had, and that they've used sparingly, is back to work legislation. I think the challenge, though, is if the government tabled back to work legislation right now, I don't think the government has the votes in the House of Commons to get that legislation passed. I think that some of the parties in the House that we may have previously relied on in passing legislation like that, that support doesn't exist anymore. So I don't even think that tool exists. Another one that is being discussed lightly is binding arbitration. I do believe that the CIRB and other agencies can get to binding arbitration so that there is a third party negotiator and they have to get to an agreement. And the final decision, the final negotiation is decided by that third party instead of CN or CP or instead of the union. I think that's an option as well. The other option I discussed with the minister as well, and I think this is more long-term planning, is looking at maintenance of activities. So we know that we have maintenance of activities at ports. So last summer, when the Port of Vancouver, for example, was on strike, grain was still able to be transported through the port and delivered to customers internationally. So we were at least still able to get grain rolling. Unfortunately, grain products like canola meal, canola oil, et cetera, those were hampered at the port. So there even needs to be a little updates on that. But what I was telling the minister was, look, we have maintenance of activities through the Canada Labor Code for ports. We should have that for railways as well, because both of those transportation networks, those supply chain networks, are important to the grain sector. He agreed, so maybe we'll see changes in the future, but the situation that we're in right now, that's not going to help. So we're a little bit in a bind, though, we'll say, unless a negotiation is made at the table.
Go back to the first option, back to work.
Yeah.
The Liberals and the Conservatives couldn't pair up here and we wouldn't have enough votes?
I just don't think there's an appetite politically right now to be going against a union. I think all parties in the House are getting ready for the future election. Unions obviously are a big part of the Canadian fabric. And when you go against one union, you kind of go against them all. And so I know that every party in the House is trying to court that vote. That includes the Bloc, that includes the NDP as well. And I think at this point in the electoral cycle, I don't think any party is going to want to put themselves out there to be anti-union at a point when they're trying to court those votes.
What are you telling your members and their members to do here? What's the action points that how people can help out?
Yeah, I think number one is putting pressure on the parties to come to an agreement. I think at the end of the day, the power is really in the hands of CP, CN, and Teamsters Canada. And I think if those three, those two companies and the union truly cared about Canadians, truly cared about the Canadian economy, truly cared about the well-being of Canadians overall, they would come to an agreement and they would find a way to move past this. I have full confidence that the folks around that table should be able to negotiate and should be able to find an agreement. At the end of the day, we're all Canadians, right? We may be working for a company, or we may be working for a union, or we may be working for whomever. But at the end of the day, I think we should have the best outcomes for the Canadian economy at mind. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, well, you could do a couple things. One, you could just park at a railway track and just watch the amount of goods going back and forth on that line. It's when you really pay attention to, a lot of times we're driving down the road and be like, oh, look, a train. right? But you don't really think about what's all on that train. That's a good way to, I think, a bit of a wake-up call for everybody. And here's a number for you. We got $1 billion worth of goods moved by rail each day in Canada. $1 billion a day. Now, we've talked about some of the impact on Canadians, and we mentioned a little bit of the impact when it comes to our major trading part of the U.S. But this will have an impact as well on trading partners around the world. And at some point, with all these labor issues that Canada has been facing, not just this one, but others, at some point, people are going to be asking, is Canada really a reliable supplier? Because they seem to be a little bit strike happy. Am I being a little bit too harsh there?
No, you're bang on. And this is exactly what I told the minister on Friday as well. We have international customers that are looking at Canada to see, they already know that we provide some of the highest quality grain in the world. That's known, that's a fact. Another fact, though, that's starting to come into play is, are we a reliable provider of that grain, or are there other countries out there that may produce almost equal of quality grain out there, but they could actually deliver it on time? The challenge is let's say you have a pasta maker in Italy, or you have a bakery in Morocco, wherever it is. They have timelines. They need to deliver products to their customers, be it grocery stores, wholesalers, etc. There's a whole supply chain here, and they're relying on our Canadian transportation network to deliver them that grain. So in this case, that wheat or that durum on time, so they can process it into a loaf of bread, or they can process it into spaghetti that then they deliver to their local grocery chain or whatever it may be. When that's delayed by weeks or months, we really start to lose some of that reliability factor around the world. And there are other international competitors, be it the US, be it Australia, be it whomever, who are out there and they're trying to get more market share as well. The whole international market is extremely competitive. And if we continue to have labor issues, supply chain issues, infrastructure issues, you name it, we already have a ton of issues as it relates to actually delivering our grain to market. Labor is just one more on top of that. They're gonna find their grain elsewhere, and that's gonna be a huge challenge for the Canadian economy and grain farmers in general.
Well, my opinion, I won't put words in your mouth, but my opinion here, we need the political parties to step up and stop thinking about votes with the unions and think about what's the impacts here of the Canadian economy. Those are my thoughts. But hey, Kyle, I really appreciate you joining us here today. Work hard on this one. We got farmers across Canada that tremendously rely on rail. So appreciate you joining us here today and give us an update.
Thanks, Sean. And if there's one last thing I can tell the farmers, that we're going to keep being out there. We're going to keep advocating. We're going to keep talking to the minister, and hopefully we'll have better news to share before August 22nd. Thanks again.
Yep.